The Shooting Range. In this episode, Pages of History, the origins of the famous Sherman Jumbo. Tactics and strategy playing on torpedo boats. But before all of that, let us remind you that the testing of the Italian Navy has just ended the other day. This means that dozens of ships from the Italian naval tree have become available to everyone following the Swedish ground forces. Try it, share your impressions in the comments, and we're moving on to our Metal Beasts section to talk about the swift American Demon. Meet F3H-2 Demon, a new deck fighter placed at BR 9.3 of the American tech tree. During the late 40s, the U.S. Air Force was evolving rapidly. The morally outdated Sky Knights and Banshees serving in the Navy could no longer withstand the competition. They required replacement, and already in 1951, a new fighter took to the sky, boasting the name the Demon. The machine is driven by a turbojet engine equipped with an afterburner. Self-sealing fuel tanks are located in the wing and in the fuselage. Under the cockpit there is the offensive armament, 4 20mm Browning Colt Mark 12 cannons with a decent ammunition stock of 760 rounds. The nose cone hides a radar station. The Demon's arsenal of secondary weapons includes up to 114 unguided Mighty Mouse rockets, various bombs ranging from 250 to 3,000 pounds, and 4 guided air-to-air missiles. As a proper fighter jet, the F3H feels great in air combat. Thanks to its powerful engine, it quickly gains altitude, and its rugged construction allows it to accelerate in a dive without having to worry about flutter instability. The plane is equipped with an afterburner, so its fuel consumption rate is brutal, which means you want to take at least 20 minutes worth of fuel if you don't want to find yourself hanging in the sky with empty fuel tanks. The AIM-9B Sidewinder missiles, familiar to a lot of pilots by now, will be quite useful in combat as a secondary weapon. They won't be able to turn towards an actively maneuvering fighter, but they can perfectly handle a sluggish opponent flying in a straight line. For the rest of the targets, you've got 4 powerful cannons with enough ammo to let you shoot long streams at the enemy planes without having to save any rounds. The main tactic when fighting on the F3H is to attack at high speed. But if you have to, you might as well engage in a dogfight. The powerful wing mechanization inherent to most deck-based aircraft significantly improves your maneuverability. Still, don't get too carried away, because a jet fighter that's lost its speed is a delicious target for pretty much any opponent you can imagine. In mixed battles, the Demon's main objective is still the same: gaining dominance in the air. Powerful weapons and excellent performance data allow it to easily deal with enemy aircraft, and when you're done with them, you can help your allies with ground targets as well. Here is where it gets a little harder for this plane. It doesn't have a ballistic computer or guided air-to-surface weapons, and the enemy at BR 9.3 already tends to have top anti-aircraft tech. Take the unguided rockets and get as close to the ground as possible. If you don't want to be shot down by AA vehicles before you reach the target, make your way into the enemy's rear by going around various terrain features, attack, and then immediately leave at ground-hugging altitude while constantly changing your course to make it harder to hit you. Your offensive armament will help you fight against light vehicles. The HEI shells in your ground targets belt penetrate up to 36 millimeters of armor, which is enough to deal with an inattentive anti-aircraft gunner. And of course, one cannot help but mention the unique 3,000-pound bomb, the M118 Demolition. It isn't your everyday option, but it's an interesting one nevertheless. It would be wasteful to use it against a single target, but it is just the best if you want to get rid of enemy vehicles grouped together in narrow urban streets. At the beginning of World War II, the American military weren't too happy about the idea of using heavy tanks, as they thought them too expensive and impractical. So while the Germans were designing super-heavy giants, and the Soviet engineers were remaking the already massive KV-220 into tanks weighing between 70 and 90 tons, the Americans were placing their bets on reliability, high mobility, and mass production. By the way, this approach often justified itself. The light Stuarts and medium Shermans showed themselves quite well both in the African sands and in the vast landscapes of the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the heavy American M6 and T-14 tanks turned out to be quite disappointing. But for the time being, it wasn't much of a concern to the military. According to their estimates, the Sherman should have been more than enough to get through the war. The first warning signs came at the end of 1942, when the Allies received the first bits of information about the Tiger, and then learned about the existence of the Panthers and the Ferdinands in the summer of 1943. But even the superiority of the German novelties in terms of armor and armament didn't initially bother the Americans too much. After all, such heavy tanks were unlikely to be mass-produced, and their mobility was nothing to be feared. Sure, the Germans would win some battles now, but it still wouldn't change the overall outcome. The Americans weren't wrong about the Tigers and the Ferdinands. They were produced in relatively small numbers and had low mobility, and in many cases, they were just hard to use. But the Panther did go into production and had an excellent gun combined with solid frontal armor, and in terms of cross-country ability and off-road speed, it wasn't inferior to the Shermans themselves. D-Day showed us that the US Army urgently needed new tanks with greater protection. The Panthers turned out to be a lot more frequent opponents than they had expected, and tank destroyers hiding behind various hedges were wiping out Shermans one after the other. They had nothing to answer these threats. The Pershing was still getting rid of its teething problems and was expected to become available only by the end of the year at best. Therefore, the American tankers had to strengthen the armor of the existing tanks in any possible way. They used sandbags, spare tracks, and even concrete. Truth be told, it didn't help as much as they had wanted. Fortunately, the Americans decided to play it safe and increased the weight of the standard M4A3 up to 38 tons. Trials have shown that the chassis could more or less withstand such a load. In addition, they had already prepared the requirements for the Sherman's assault modification back in March 1944. Its maximum speed was slightly reduced, and the entire weight reserve was put into armor reinforcement. The assault tank was virtually invulnerable to the Panzer IV from the front and could even survive a hit from an 88mm weapon. About 6 months later, the troops received the first 250 of these tanks, the M4A3E2, also known as the Jumbo, and they were right on time. It was autumn and rains made it very hard to drive on soil, so the columns had to move along the narrow European roads. And if the Germans managed to hit the leading vehicle of such a column, the others were now unable to go further and were trapped. But when they started using the renewed Shermans to lead the columns, it worked wonders. Tank commanders praised the Jumbo and were asking to send more of these, but there was nothing to send. They'd soon stopped assembling this modification, perhaps because it was too expensive, or perhaps because the tank was considered a temporary solution and wasn't planned to be mass-produced in the first place. We don't know for sure, but the fact remains the same. Arguably, the most successful tank in its family never went into mass production. Still, military history remembers many things much more curious than that. A torpedo is a cheap and dangerous weapon that can sneak up on a large ship almost invisibly and often destroy it in one hit. Not surprisingly, it's become widely used in fleets around the world. Various means of delivering these deadly projectiles have also been developed. So now it's time to talk about torpedo boats. These fast and nimble boats are dangerous adversaries to any large and sluggish ship, especially since they're available at the earliest BRs. We'll start with the interface and controls. The semi-transparent white line that appears after we select an opponent serves as a leading marker for a precise torpedo launch. A handy button for this function can be set up in Controls, Common, Basic, Lock Target. Another useful button is responsible for selecting the torpedo tube that will be used to launch the torpedo. To set it up, go to Controls, Naval, Weaponry, Torpedo Aiming. Now, if you align the green aiming line with the leading marker, the torpedo will go exactly towards the target, unless, of course, it changes its trajectory. Okay, let's go to battle. At low ranks, torpedo boats encounter equally fast and maneuverable opponents. Hitting them with a torpedo is only possible by accident, so your main weapons here should be cannons and machine guns. But even here, you'll find suitable targets for your torpedoes. For example, German artillery barges and air defense floating batteries. Destroying them with gunfire is difficult, but they can't dodge a torpedo, and a single hit will most often be enough to send a cumbersome construct to the bottom. Besides, torpedoes can be fired in a fan pattern in narrow straits. Then there's a chance that a careless opponent stumbles upon them on their own, and you get an easy frag. The most advanced torpedo boats encounter not only their counterparts, but also larger ships, destroyers. Cannons and machine guns aren't effective against them, and torpedoes become your primary means of fighting. Enemy boats pose the greatest threat to you, so it's important to deal with them before you take on larger targets. And that's where artillery weapons will come in handy. Now, when you're done with the boats, let's move on to the fun part. Find an enemy preoccupied with fighting your allied ships, jump out from behind an island, fire a torpedo, and before the enemy comes to his senses, go back to hiding, covered by a smokescreen. Finally, if you want to test yourself in the hunt for the largest enemy ships, light and heavy cruisers, you need to go to their battle rating. Now, we should warn you right away, it's not gonna be easy. Your tiny defenseless boat won't survive a single hit of their weapons, even the auxiliary caliber ones. Most of the time, they stay away from islands or even fight in the open sea, so getting within the launch range becomes a real challenge of its own. But if you do succeed, don't spare the torpedoes. Launch them all to make sure you sink the enemy. They won't give you another chance. And of course, don't forget that the speed performance of torpedo boats allow them to successfully carry out another crucial type of combat mission, capturing points. If your team's light ships get carried away with hunting for larger targets right from the start, and the enemy, on the contrary, rushes to capture, you may lose even before the destroyers and cruisers can fully engage in the battle. So, no matter how tempting it is to add a quick frag to your score, you still need to keep an eye on the map. And in case of danger, buy some time until your slower allies make their way to their positions and start protecting the points themselves. We wish you good luck. And let's move on to the final section of the shooting range. Your questions that you ask in the comments. The first question was sent by a player called Just Huston. What is the best way of making silver lions and earning RP? Well, you get the most silver lions and research points when you play on premium vehicles with a premium account. And if you have a favorite vehicle in the main branch, you can get a talisman for it, which will give you an extra 100% of RP. Now, if you don't want to spend golden eagles, check out the orders and the wages, which you get in battles and for logging on into game every day. When used wisely and skillfully, they can bring you a lot of bonus points and silver. Atheist3 asks, can you do a tips and tricks about different air-to-ground missiles? I've just started unlocking them and could use a few pointers. Okay, all air-to-ground rockets are divided into guided and unguided. There aren't many guided ones in the game for now, but all of them have quite powerful warheads that can destroy a target from a single successful hit. The unguided ones are a lot more numerous, and they usually have cumulative or high-explosive warheads. You want to pick the ones with better armor-piercing rate and the ones carrying more explosives. And be prepared that you might need more than one successful hit to destroy your target. Another question comes from the Lost Soul 1024. What happens when a tank hits a jet plane in midair? Can you guys test it out, please? Well, let's figure it out. Let's speed up real good, jump, and don't try this at home. Then there's a question set up by Snoopy. Is there any possibility of a tank that doesn't exist being in the game, like a tank from the future? Well, we are on the side of realism in terms of that, especially since there are still loads of real machines that we'd like to introduce into the game. But every year, right before the 1st of April, the developers get a strange fire in their eyes, and almost nothing in the universe can restrain their fantasy. Anything is possible around that time. Flying Kiwi writes, this season actually looks kinda good. Thank you for your kind words. We put a lot of effort into that one. And the last message for today was written by Soren Mikhailov. Alternative history? Looks like Gaijin got bored? Oh, not in the slightest. We wanted to give you the opportunity of fighting on modern American, European, and Soviet tech in the new season of World War. But there weren't many major conflicts after World War II, so we had a choice in front of us. Go to the past and reenact a full-scale war, or pick one of the scenarios that were predicted theoretically but never actually happened in reality. We decided to go with the more humane option. Well, that's all you're getting for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment, which premieres every Sunday at 4 p.m. GMT or noon Eastern Time. Remember, that's 7 o'clock in Moscow. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, leave a like, fire those torpedoes away, and tell us what you think in the comments below. See you on the other side of the coming week.